Hey there, Daniel JS here, and in this video we're going to build this simple calculator project using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Now this is a very simple design. It doesn't really do anything that let's say a scientific calculator does, but for what it is, it actually does quite a bit. So let's go ahead and see if we can do some basic arithmetic. So if I were to do 3 plus 3, we can get the total there. Let me go and clear that. Or maybe we could even try, I don't know, maybe 8 divided by 4. And now we got 2. We can do times 2. And we get 4. We can do divided by 2 equals 2. And what's also really cool, let me clear this out. Yep, clear button works also. You can even do decimal. So you can do 2.5 plus 2.5 and equals 5. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and get right into it. As you can tell, we pretty much know exactly what we're building. We'll start off by creating the markup, which is your basic HTML. We'll add some styling. We'll see if we can get at least a static representation created first. And then we'll go ahead and add the logic. Okay, so let's go ahead and begin. So I'm just going to move this screen out of the way. And what we're going to do is let's open up our VS Code. Actually, you know what we'll do? We'll start with a terminal. That way we can just create all of our files and folders from scratch. Now I'm going to place this on my desktop, so I'm going to navigate there first. And then from the desktop, I'm going to make a directory called calculator. Perfect. All right, so now I'm going to cd into calculator. And I'm going to make 2 directories, CSS and JS. And let's do an ampersand right here. I'm going to touch a file called index.html, readme.md, and then inside of that CSS folder, I'm going to make a file called style.css. And let me just make this full screen so you can see what I'm doing here, because I'm going to chain all this together. And then inside of the JS folder, I'm going to make a file called script.js. Perfect. Okay, let's see what that looks like. Now I'm just going to open this up in VS Code, and that way we can start getting to work on our project here. Let me close my terminal. And I'm going to make this full screen now. Oh, it looks like I got some kind of notification there. Let's go ahead and make this full screen. I'm going to zoom in so you guys can see what I'm doing here. All right. So right now we basically have all of our blank files. But just to recap, I have a CSS folder with the style.css file inside of it. I got a JS folder with a script.js file inside of it. I got index.html, and I have my README. So inside my README, I'm going to go ahead and add some basic information about this project. By the way, any software project that you build, you want to always have a readme.md file in here. This is a very important file because, well, it allows you to provide some information about this project, what it does, what technologies does it use. Maybe you can even provide some screenshots or even instructions on how to use it. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to do calculator, and I'll do a simple calculator, calculator app that runs in your browser. Cool. Let's do a level 2 heading. This will be technologies. Technologies. There we go. Technologies used. And then we're using HTML5, CSS 3. We're using JavaScript, and we'll just keep it very simple, just like that. Okay. All right. So the other thing that one thing that's really cool about VS Code is that it has this hidden feature right here where you can actually see a preview of the output of your Markdown. So this Markdown, once you have this project pushed up to GitHub, there we go, pushed up to GitHub, you will notice that, well, this will actually become the home page for your project's repository. So you'll be able to see pretty much what you see on the right side of the screen. So yeah, let's go ahead and get this out of the way. Whoops. Let's go ahead and save that. All right. Now that we have our readme.md file made, let's go ahead and open up our index.html. By the way, this feature that you're seeing me use, if you just do Command P, that's going to open up your search bar, and then you can just type index.html, and that will pull up your index.html. Okay, let's go ahead and we're going to use the emit abbreviation to get ourselves a HTML boilerplate. So I'm going to do Shift Tab, or excuse me, Shift, so that I can use the exclamation mark. Really, it's just exclamation mark tab, and that's going to give you your boilerplate. Let's change the title right here. We'll call this calculator. All right, and inside of the body, we want to go ahead and start putting our markup down. Now, before we do this, however, I do recommend adding a link so that we can go ahead and link our CSS. Now, this is a link tag. We use this for our external CSS resources. So we're going to do link : CSS. This is another emit abbreviation. Emit is a tool that gives you the shorthand shortcuts, if you will, to produce certain elements in your HTML. Now, the default that it gives us is actually pointing to a file at the same level as our index.html called style.css. We actually want to go inside of this folder, the CSS folder. So we're going to do, let's see, /CSS. You see it's even helping me out there. And then style.css. Perfect. Let's go ahead and link in our external JavaScript. Now to do this, we're going to need a script file. And I want the script file that does include the src attribute. So we're going to do script:/src. And we also need to point to a relative file path where our local JavaScript file is located. So I'm going to do ./js/script.js. Now, a very important thing that I'm also going to do, since we're putting the script tag in the head of the document, we also want to add that defer attribute. And this is very important because we want to make sure that the content in the body is loaded first before our JavaScript gets executed. Okay, so let's go ahead and save that right there. Okay. And yeah, let's go ahead and start making the basic content of our calculator. So we're basically just going to have a main element inside a body, and the main element itself is going to be our calculator. Okay, so that's pretty much it. We're only going to have a calculator on the page. Everything else is basically just going to be non-existent. Okay, so that main tag is going to be our calculator. We also need a place for the input and output display. So we need a display, some type of element to represent our display. So for a calculator, the perfect element for that is going to be an input element. So let's go ahead and input a input element. I usually go with a type text for more of a general type input element. And then the other thing we're going to do is let's go ahead and add a section tag, and this is going to be where all of our buttons live, okay? And we're even going to give it the ID of buttons, okay? So we're going to add section. Let's use section, and then I'm going to do hashtag buttons, okay? And that's going to give it an ID of buttons. Let's go ahead and hit return. There we go. And now at this point, I think we're going to need about 16 buttons, okay? I mean, if you look at our calculator app, the example that I showed you, there are really, it's 4 rows of 4 buttons. 4 rows of 4 buttons, so 16 buttons. We also have a clear button that's going to go down here, but we'll start off with just getting the actual button elements for all the other buttons besides the clear. So we're going to do div. And we're going to give this the class of button. So we'll do actually div.button. There we go. And I'm going to use the star key. And then I'm going to put 16. That's going to produce 16 divs with the class of button. There we go. Now right below that, I'm also going to want a I'm going to need an element that also is going to be for the clear button. So I'm going to make one additional div right here. And this is going to be our clear button, and it's going to have the ID of clear. So we're going to do div hashtag clear. Okay, and I'm just going to put a C right here. That's going to be the only content that that div's going to have. Now, as far as the content for the buttons themselves, again, we can actually see how our calculator is kind of laid out. Now, I have to keep my notes on another screen just so I can remember which buttons go where, just for the sake of this video and make it a little bit easier to follow along. I'm going to refer to my notes as I do this, but yeah, you just want to take note of how these buttons are lined up, okay? And that way it's going to help us when we start adding the content to these divs, okay? So these first 4 divs are going to have the content of 7, and then we're going to do 8, and then 9, and then we're going to use the division operator. And a really good way to do this, now if you're using a Mac, you're actually in good hands, because if you do Option Command Space, that's going to open up your emojis. And if you just do division, you're going to notice that it provides a division emoji that you can use. So this is a really good tool for, you know, just adding that content in there. If you're not using a MacBook, you might have to just use the backslash in place of a div. Okay, so yeah, I'm not quite sure how you would have to do that on a Mac or a Windows, but yeah. Let's go ahead and add the next elements, or the next pieces of content, which is going to be 4, 5, and 6. Okay, and then we're going to have the multiplication operator, and for that, I can just do, let's see, multiplication. There we go. We got one right here. So let's go ahead and add that in. Okay, and then the next 4 is going to be 1, 2, and 3. And then we have the subtraction operator. So again, I'm going to use subtraction. I think I have, well, I got this one right here that it's not, it's like a dark subtraction operator. I can't really use that, so that's okay. Instead, what I can do is just use the minus operator that's located on my keyboard. And you can also use that as well for Windows or Linux. All right, let's go ahead and add our next bit of content here. So that's going to be the 0, and then we're going to use the decimal, and then we need the plus sign, and then the equal sign. Perfect. Let's go ahead and save that right there. And the next thing that we're going to also want to do before we get too far ahead of ourselves is I also recommend using the outline or creating an outline class that we can basically provide so that we can at least see our elements as we're putting some shape to them. So I think that's going to really help us out, especially when it comes to, you know, when it comes to actually seeing the content before we apply like the various styles and colors. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add, let's add a class of outline. And you're going to see what we do with this a little bit later on, but we're going to add the class of outline. And then basically to, let's see, let's go ahead and add the class of outline to this one as well. Let's do class outline. And basically, whenever we start creating our CSS, you'll see exactly why I'm doing this. But yeah, okay. So we got our class outline to the input, class outline to the main tag, and then for every one of these buttons, I'm going to add the class outline as well. And a really easy way to do this is if you just put your cursor in one of these class values and you do Command D, you can go into multi-cursor mode. And that's going to allow us to select them all. Okay, perfect. And now I'm just going to hit the space, and then we'll put the class outline. Okay, and then I'll also add the class outline to our clear button as well. Perfect. All right, there we go. So I'm going to save that right there. And yeah, I think we're in good shape. The only other thing I suggest that we do at this point is let's go ahead and add version control to our project so that we can kind of keep track of our progress. So I'm going to open up my terminal with, let's see, control backtick. That's going to open up my terminal, and I'm going to run git init. Okay, so I can create a Git repository. And then the next thing I want to do is go ahead and git add all my files. So we're going to do git add and then readme.md. I'll do a git, oops, let's do that again. Git add readme.md. We'll do git commit -m adds readme. Perfect. And then let's go ahead and do git add, let's see, CSS, style.css, and then JS, script.js. We'll do git commit, and we'll say adds, assets. Perfect. The next thing that we're going to also want to do is add our HTML. So we'll do git add index.html, git commit, adds starter markup. Perfect. Now, one thing to point out is I am doing this on the master branch. And for the purposes of simplicity and not getting ourselves too deep in the weeds, I'm not going to use branching. I'm not going to use feature branching for this. It's actually a really, really bad practice to make commits directly to master, except for that first commit, of course. Normally what I would have done in a professional setting is I would have probably made that initial commit of my files, probably even before we even started adding the content. And then I would have gone over to a feature branch or a development branch and then start adding to these files. And then at some point, once I reach a milestone, once I add, complete my user stories and at least get a version 1, I can merge into master. But in this case, we're going to keep it simple. We're just going to commit directly to master, and that way I can at least give you an idea of how to add this to your workflow. Okay, let's go ahead and close our terminal with control backtick and give that a second there. There seems to be a little lag in my, let's see, yeah, there seems to be a little bit of a lag in my keyboard. Okay, well, we'll figure that out. I'll just have to close it manually for now. Cool, so the next thing I want to do is let's go ahead and head over to our, let's see, let's go to style.css. And we're going to add some boilerplate CSS just to get ourselves started. And then we'll make a commit, and then we'll just kind of move on from there. Okay, so normally whenever I'm setting up a project, I like to add some type of reset CSS. We're going to do something, probably the most basic reset CSS you can go with. Let's add box sizing and set it to border box, and then we'll set the margin to 0. And pretty much what this is going to do is remove some of the default user agent styles that your browser might be applying. And this at least allows us to add the sizing and the various other things that we might need to do with a little bit more precision. Okay. The other thing I want to do is also select the body tag, and I'm going to set the font family to Helvetica. So let's do Helvetica. Let's see, Helvetica. Okay. The other thing I also want to do is I'm going to set the display property to flex, and I'll set flex direction to column. Okay, and that way everything's going to basically be aligned vertically. And then we also want to align horizontally. That's what align items is going to do for us. So that way we're going to have things a little bit, they're going to be set up a little bit better for us in this case. The other thing I also want to do is set the min height to 100 viewport height units. And the reason why I'm using viewport height units is because this is just a shorthand. Normally you might be thinking we should do 100%, but in order to do that, percentages are only relative to their parent, and the parent to the body is actually the root HTML element. And unfortunately, or actually it's the HTML element in itself. There's also a root element as well. But anyways, the HTML element would also have to be set to 100% height, and that just requires a little bit more code in this case. So we're not going to do that. This is a much better practice. So let's go ahead and do that. The other thing I also want to do is set up that outline class that I was telling you about earlier. And outline, it's just a shorthand, and it's going to allow us to kind of see our elements as we create them. So let's go ahead and do border, and we're going to do, how about 3 pixels? Actually, let's just do 1 pixel. 1 pixel dotted red. There we go. 1 pixel dotted red, and awesome. Okay, let's save that right there. And the other thing I also want to do, let's just go to script.js, and we're going to add an alert right here that just says JS is loaded, because we just want to make sure that our JavaScript is working. And now I'm going to use this live server feature that VS Code offers. And by the way, if you don't use live server, you definitely want to use it, especially for simple front-end projects like we're building right now. It's a perfect tool for that. And in case you want to know where to find it, if you go to your extensions widget right here, you can just search for live server. And you definitely want to get it. You definitely want to get it for your VS Code. So click on live server. You can install it. As you can see, quite a few people approve of it. Yeah, it's a very popular tool for this. So once this is installed, you're going to get a little widget at the very bottom right corner that says Go Live. If you click on that, it's going to basically open up a project that we can get started and look at. So let me go ahead and show you guys what I have on my screen. This is going to take me just a second because I do have another window that I need to create for you here. Okay, perfect. So here it is right here. This is basically what our calculator looks like. Not very much to look at, but that's okay. If I just refresh the screen, you'll see that my JavaScript's connected. We obviously have our CSS connected, so we're in really good shape. So let me go ahead and move this out of the way. And this is a perfect opportunity to go ahead and add some more commits. So let's go ahead and do git add, let's see, CSS style.css. We'll do git commit -n, and we'll put a message that says adds boilerplate, and then we'll just do that. Okay. The next thing that we'll want to do is also, we'll do git add JS script.js, and then we'll add a message for that. Adds, let's see here, we'll add, actually, you know what, we probably don't want to commit that right now because that's really not anything that's going to be contributing to our project. So let's just do git reset. I don't know why I did that. I got on a roll there. We don't really need this. I'm actually going to remove it now. So let's just save that. Let's take a look and see what else is happening. Okay, so we have this settings.json, and this is just a config for VS Code because we are using live server, and I was using it earlier to showcase the finished version of this, so I'm not even going to worry about tracking that. I'm just going to kind of leave that in there. So yeah, we don't even need to track that, so I'm just going to leave that in there. But for the time being, yeah, let's go ahead and see what else we can do with our project. The next thing we want to do is probably start working on the main element so that we can at least make it start to look like a calculator. So we'll focus on that, and then we'll start focusing on kind of the inner elements such as the buttons and all that good stuff. So let's go ahead and open up our style.css. The other thing I also want to do is add a selector for our main tag. And for this, let's go ahead and add, let's add a border. Okay, so we're going to add a border. We'll do something like, how about 3 pixels solid black? Okay, and then we'll also do, let's set our height and width dimensions. So we'll do height. Let's go with something like, I don't know, maybe 600, 700. Let's do 700 pixels. And then for the width, we'll do, I don't know, maybe something kind of halfway. So we'll do like 350 pixels. And the next thing that I also want to do, I have a weird lag going on with my keyboard here. The next thing that I also want to do is I'm going to take advantage of Flexbox. Okay, so let's go ahead and set display flex for this, and then we'll set flex direction to column. Okay, and yeah, I think that should get us in a good spot. Let's save that and see what that does. Okay, so that's our calculator. Now we're not going to see the border because of the nature of cascading style sheets. That black border that I added is getting overridden by the outline class. So we're going to have to remove that outline class so that we can see, we can see the outline of our calculator. Okay, so yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Let me just move this out of the way. And we're going to need to go over into our index.html, and I'm going to remove the outline class from the main element. Let's go ahead and just get that out of the way. And now let's see how that resulted. Yeah, much better. The other thing I also want to do is I want to center this a little bit better on the page. Right now it is horizontally aligned, or yeah, it's horizontally aligned, but I also want to vertically align it as well. And then I also want to round off the corners. Okay, so we can totally do that. Let's move this out of the way. So let's go back to our CSS. And in order to do this, in addition to setting in addition to setting a line item center, that's a horizontal alignment, let's also set justify content to center, and that's going to vertically align our flex item on the main axis. And then back into our main, we're also going to want it to set the border radius. Okay, let's do border radius. I'm going to go with something like about 12 pixels. Okay, I think that's going to really get us in a good spot for what we're trying to do. So let's go ahead and take a look and see where we're at with it now. Okay, that's looking a whole lot better. Cool. So let's go ahead and start working on some of the inner elements. Okay, we'll start with the input. So this is pretty much this element right here. This is going to be the display. So we'll work on that, and then we'll just kind of work our way down until we get this thing actually looking like a calculator. Okay. So I'm going to come down here. Let's go to let's go ahead and add a Descendant Selector. So we'll do main input, and then right here I'm going to set the width to 100%. Okay, 100%, and then let's go ahead and do a height of, I don't know, something like 150 pixels. Okay, and then for the font size, we definitely want the font to be relatively large for this. So I think we'll go with something like maybe 100 pixels. We'll see what that looks like. And then the next thing we'll also want to do is make the font nice and bold. So I'll do font weight, and we'll go with something like 700. Okay. And then with that being said, I think we also want to set the background color. Okay, so let's go ahead and set the background color, because based on the final version, we were going with like a grayish color. So let's go ahead and set the background color to gray, which also means that we need to set the color of the text to, let's just do white. Okay, and then the other thing I also want to do is, let's see, why don't we do, yeah, we're going to need to set the border as well. So we're going to need to set the border to something like something really thick, like 10 pixels, solid black. And then let's save that and let's see what that did. Okay, that's not too bad. Except the final version, the text should be aligned to the right. Okay, and we're not able to see that thick border because it's getting overridden by the outline. So we're going to need to kind of undo that as well. So let's go ahead and move this out of the way. The only other thing that we should probably do for this input is set text align to right. Okay, and with that set up, let's go ahead and go into our index.html, and let's remove the outline class from the input element. So let's get that out of there. Okay, and that way we can actually see the outline a little bit better. So with that in place, now we'll see that there is a really thick border around it, and now if I type a number, that is looking pretty cool. Yeah, I love that. All right. Cool. All right, so with that being said, let's go ahead and move on and start working on our buttons, okay? Now this is going to be pretty fun because I think this is going to give us a chance to really make this look like a calculator. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's head over back to our CSS. And I guess at this point, maybe what we'll do is we'll first target the container element that holds all the buttons. And that's actually, it has an ID of buttons, if you remember when we set this up. Let's go ahead and set its display property to flex. And we'll also do, let me think. We're going to also need to take advantage of one of the cool features that Flexbox has, which is the fact that it can actually wrap elements. So we're going to do flex wrap. Now by default, it's set to no wrap, and we're going to set it to wrap. And what this does is it's going to try and fit all the content in the Flexbox, in the Flex container. So every child element in a Flex container is considered a Flex item. And we're going to size those items, and whenever you set its container to its flex wrap property to wrap, it's going to try and basically fit as many of those elements on one row, if you will. We call it a row. And once it reaches the edge, it will basically just wrap around and it creates another row. It's a really cool effect. It's going to make this so much easier when it comes time to getting this set up. So the other thing we also want to do is maybe set the height and width to 100%. So let's go ahead and do that. So height and width, let's set those both to 100%. Ooh, 100%. Okay, and let's see what that looks like. Okay, now this might look a little discouraging, but that's okay. I kind of already know where this is going to go. It may be hard to believe, but this is actually exactly what I'm expecting it to do. We haven't sized our buttons, and that's why they're all kind of like jammed together. But as we add sizes to these buttons, you're going to notice that they're going to be neatly organized in kind of like these rows. And I think that's going to really start to make this thing pop quite a bit. So let's move this out of the way. So I'm going to probably need to add some more stuff to this selector here in a moment, but let's move on to the actual button class. Okay, so for this, we're also going to set the display to flex. And the reason why we want to do this is because we want to center the content inside of each button. And right now, the content is just, you know, the actual characters. So we're going to also justify the content to center. And we're going to align item center. And this is a really cool trick whenever you want to vertically and horizontally align items within a Flex container. Okay, let's set the font size to, I don't know, something like, let's go with 65 pixels. Okay, and then I'm also going to set the height to 75 pixels. And I'm going to set the width, let's see, yeah, I'll set the width to 75 pixels. That way it's nice and symmetrical. And in order to produce this circular button effect, we're going to set the border radius to 50%. Okay? And then we also need to set the color to white. And let's just save that. And let's see what that produces. Okay, so I'm going to move this down. And that is looking a whole lot better. Not quite what we want it to look like, but it's definitely getting there. So I think what we're going to probably end up doing is we're going to set the background color of the entire calculator itself to black, and then we're going to set each button's background color to crimson. It's like a dark burnt red. And then we can't see the content in here, but there actually is. You can barely see it. There actually is characters in here. Okay. And then we also wanted this clear button to show up kind of in this last row. Okay. So let's go ahead and get this out of the way. And what we're going to do is let's go back up to that main element. Okay, let's go back up to the main element. And that's actually right over here. I think, yeah, this is where we're going to set the background color. So let's go ahead and do background color. We'll set it to black. All right. And then with that being set to black, now we can come over back to our button class, and let's set its background color to crimson. So we'll do background color, crimson. Okay. And then the other thing that we probably want to do is set some space around each element so that they kind of push outward. And this is going to be the margin property. So we're going to have to use the margin property for this. If we could just set like margin all the way around, how about something like 3 pixels? And I think that's going to produce the effect that we're looking for. So let's just save that. And yeah, I think three pixels should be good. The other thing that we probably want to do is figure out this clear button. But before we do that, let's just see what our calculator looks like. All right, well, this is really starting to shape up quite a bit. Now, it's a little bit skewed because we haven't fixed this clear button yet, but that's okay. That's going to be pretty easy to do. As a matter of fact, why don't we just start working on that right now? So I'm going to move this out of the way. Let's go into our index.html. And as we remember, down here, this clear button has an ID of clear. Okay? And also another thing I want to point out is it's probably a good idea to just go ahead and remove these outline classes. So I'm going to select the rest of these and just get rid of them because we're kind of done with these at this point. All right, so let's go ahead and get rid of this. And then I'm just going to remove this one completely outright. Okay, so let's get rid of our outline classes. The other thing that we want to do is definitely add the styles for the clear button. So let's go back into our style.css, and we're going to scroll down to the very bottom. And I guess I can just get rid of this outline class now because we're done with it. Let's add the selector for our clear ID. And let's see here. I think what we should do is maybe set the height to like 100 pixels. And then we'll do display flex on this one as well. And that way we can do justify content to center align on the main axis, and also align item center so that we can vertically align as well. Let's also set the background color to crimson, and then we'll also set the color to white. Whoops, not wheat, white. It's funny how wheat is actually a color on here. The other thing I also want to do is smooth out the border. So let's set the border radius to 12 pixels, same as the outside element as well. And then I guess the only other thing we need to do is maybe set the width, okay? And I don't know, I'm thinking that we're going to probably need to go with something a little bit less than 100% because we don't want it to touch the inside of the parent. So maybe we can do a width of, how about, I don't know, maybe 90%. Let's see what 90% width gives us. Okay, the other thing I also want to do is let's go ahead and set the font size. We'll set font size to, how about, we'll go with 65 pixels as well, just like, oh, that's not right. 65 pixels as well. I think that's what we did for the buttons. Let's do 65 pixels. Did we do that for the buttons? Yes, we did. Okay, that way it's a little bit more uniform. And yeah, I think that's looking pretty good. So let's go ahead and check out what we have so far. All right. Oh, and it looks like I lost my window. Okay. So that's looking pretty good. The only other thing that we probably want to make sure we're good on is it looks like we have an alignment issue that we're going to need to sort out. Everything's getting pushed over to the origin. So let's just verify that we do have the CSS for our buttons container set correctly. So that's definitely something that we need to go ahead and take a look at again. Let's go back up to our buttons selector. So we did set the display property to flex, but the other thing that we should probably do is we're going to need to align the items and justify content to center. That's why they're not showing up centered in the container. So let's do justify content center and then align items center. And that way we'll have vertical and horizontal alignment for those buttons. Okay, let's bring that down, and that is looking so much better. Yeah, I really like how that turned out. Okay, the only other thing that I also want to do is add like a hover effect so that when you actually hover over the buttons, they kind of like darken, or they appear to darken a little bit. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. So let's go ahead and move this out of the way. The best way to do that is actually using the hover pseudo class. So we're just going to scroll down here. I'll just go down to the very bottom. We'll add a selector for button, and I'm going to use the pseudo hover class. We're going to comma separate. Let's also add one for our clear button, and we'll do hover for that one as well. And then we're just going to set the background color. Now I'm going to set it to crimson. This is a little trick that I do. We'll set it to crimson. Now watch this. When you hover over it, it's going to give you like a color selector. And what I normally do in a case like this, if I want to kind of like create the effect where it kind of darkens, the background color of the parent is black. So if we want some of the black to shine through, one trick you could do is add transparency to the button. So that's what we're going to do. We'll add transparency. Why don't we try something like, I don't know, we'll do 0.5. Let's do 0.5 on the alpha. So we're doing RGBA. So it's the same color, but we just added transparency to it. You could also set the opacity rating if you wanted to, but you know, I kind of like doing it this way just for the sake of showing you a neat little trick there. So let's bring this down. And now when I try to hover over these, you'll see that it creates that cool effect. And that's actually what's happening is it's just becoming transparent and the background of the parent element is starting to shine through. So it almost looks like we're kind of like pressing down on the buttons when we hover over them, even though we're not like actually clicking on them. All right, so that is that's a nice little milestone that we just created. Let's go ahead and commit our code, and then we'll move on to the JavaScript itself. Okay, so let's just get this out of the way. I'm going to open up my integrated terminal, and let's just do git status just to see what progress we've made. We also made some changes in the index.html when we removed the outline class. So you know what we'll do? We'll do git add index.html, and then we'll do git commit removes outline. Perfect. And then we'll do git add CSS style.css, and we'll do git commit adds styles. And I know these commit messages are kind of very generic and almost kind of redundant because you can clearly see just by looking at the progress in each commit, if you were to look at this on GitHub or any other type of tool that you use to review commit progress. I'm just doing this for the sake of the lesson. Sometimes you want to be a little bit more descriptive, but not redundant. I typically keep my commit messages to between 3 to 5 words. But you have a 50-character limit, so you definitely want to be very careful about it. You don't want to be too wordy, but you also want to be very descriptive, and you always start with a verb. So you'll also notice that I do that a lot with my commit messages. Okay, so we are in good shape, guys. Let's go ahead and head over to our JavaScript and get started there. So with the JavaScript, we're going to write a program that basically responds to a button click. Okay, so whenever I click on one of these buttons, I want to be able to respond to this button click, right? We want to invoke some kind of behavior in our application whenever a button's clicked on. Okay, in addition to that, we also want to display some feedback in this input element that we're using as a display. Okay, so that's going to be kind of like the result of the behavior that's going to get invoked by one of these buttons being clicked on, okay? And yeah, so we're going to go in and get started. Now, my favorite approach for organizing a JavaScript program is something known as the Ipo pattern, which stands for input, process, output, okay? And the way this idea works is you have all your inputs, right? All the pieces of data that you're going to be working with. You process that data, right? And the processing of that data can be, it could be the responding of certain events taking place, the mutation of data, and then you have some type of output. And this is where you see the result of us performing services on that data. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. And we're going to create a section for, let's see, variables and constants, constant data. We're also going to have a section for cached element references. We're also going to have a section for event listeners. We're also going to have a section for functions, okay? And these are all very important, and you could clearly just write this entire program without even having to organize it like this, but I definitely recommend staying organized as much as possible. So let's think about some things that we're probably going to need to have in our program that are going to change throughout the life cycle of this program. There's really, well, off the top of my head, there's really only two pieces of data that I know of that we're probably going to need to respond to, right? And these pieces of data are really they're going to kind of be like the state of our calculator. So the state of our calculator is going to have really just two pieces of state. One's going to be output, or actually input. So we'll say input, let input. The other piece of data that we're going to be working with that can also change is going to be our output. Okay, so input and output. And depending on what these values are, that's going to totally change the behavior of our app, right? We're going to see something different. We're going to take in the input, which can be anything for that matter, and then we're going to be able to change that, and then we're going to be able to actually output something. Okay. So the other thing that we're going to want to set up is our cached element references. Now these are pieces of the DOM, or the document object model, that the user is going to either interact with, or maybe we're going to need to display information on. So let's take a look and see what we have here. So in the DOM, right, we have this display, okay? So we have the display, and the display is, well, it's going to have, we're going to need to select this because this is where the output of whatever actions they're taking is going to be displayed. We also want to make sure that these buttons are interactive, so we're going to need to probably set up some type of event listener on this, and also our clear button. And I want to separate the logic between the clear button and the actual buttons themselves. And you'll see why once we go a little bit further into this. But yeah, let's go ahead and head back over to our JavaScript. And right here, what I'm going to do is let's create a variable called button. Let's call it controller, or container, excuse me, container. And I'm going to kind of abbreviate this. This is going to be our button container. And this is going to be actually the element that all the buttons are inside of. So we're going to say document dot get element by ID. And this is going to be the element that has an ID of buttons. There we go. The other thing that we also want to select is the clear button. Okay, so let's go ahead and create another variable. I use constants for these because we're never going to reassign this ever. So let's go ahead and call this clear btn el. Trying to be descriptive there. Let's set that to document.get element by ID, and this is going to be the element with an ID of clear. The other thing that we also want to do is we want to grab the display, which is that input element. So we're going to do input el, and we're going to set that to document dot. Now we don't have an ID on it, but we can use the query selector, and we'll select this. Now this is an input element, and to select an input element specifically by its type, and I don't know why I'm having trouble typing this. There we go. You typically want to go with you can use square bracket notation, and you can actually find the input element that has a type of text. In this way, if at some point you decide you want to have various input elements on there, well, this is only going to grab the first one, but I'm just being a little bit more specific in this case. I guess at some point maybe we could go back and we can add an ID to it, but since I don't ever plan on having any other input element on the page, I guess this is fine as well. Another thing that's also good to know is that if I wanted to, I could also do this. This is also another thing that we could do, especially since we're not really going to select any other input tag on the page. So I guess in this case, this will work. We'll just do that for now. Let's just keep it simple. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to the next section. This is going to be where our event listeners are located, and event listeners are pretty much just, I want you to think of them, they're functions, okay? They're functions that we can attach to elements, and what happens is the browser is going to be basically watching out for events, and based on these event listeners that we're registering, when a certain event occurs, right, and we can actually decide which event it is, the browser will basically invoke a function for us, okay? So we're going to really need to set up two event listeners. One is going to be the button container. You know what? Let's call this buttons container, okay? I think that's a little bit more descriptive. The other one's going to be the clear button, okay? Those are really the only two pieces of user interface that the user is going to be interacting with. So we want to listen for those events. So let's start with btn's container, and we're going to add an event listener using the .addEventListener method. Now we want to register this as a click event, so I'm going to use the magic click string right there, and then the function that's going to get invoked as a result, we'll just call it handle click, and we typically call this, we name it handle because this is considered an event handler, so by convention we typically call it handle something, in this case handle click. Now, I haven't actually created this function yet, so let's go ahead and define this right below. So we'll do function handle click, and I'm probably going to need access to the event object that gets created whenever that does get clicked on. We're just going to stub this up for now, and I'm just going to add an alert, and we'll say something like a button was clicked. Perfect. Let's see here. The other thing we also want to add an event listener to is this clear button, okay? And we're going to do, how about clear btnel.addEventListener, and this is also going to be registered as a click event, and the name of the function that we're going to call is handle clear or init. Handle clear or init. And this is going to be kind of like the starter function that's going to pretty much just start our app for us. And this may not make a lot of sense right now, but that's okay. We'll kind of go over this. But basically what I want this to do is when this function runs, I want it to basically give us a brand new calculator to work with, or if you click on it again, let's say when you want to clear it, you can also have it start over, clear all of our input value, or our input value and our output value. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an alert here as well, and I'll just say handle, let's see, start or clear calculator. Calculator, there we go. All right, excellent. Okay, now another thing I also want to do, since this is kind of like an initialization function, it's going to run as soon as the app loads, I'm going to actually call it immediately, okay? So I think this is a really good stopping point. Let's save that. All right, as you can see, our application just reloaded thanks to live server. And yeah, as you can see, that first function just ran, which was handle clear and init, or handle init or clear. I'm getting them mixed up. But yeah, that's exactly what we wanted to happen. Now, let's go ahead and dismiss that, and let's take a look and see what our calculator is doing now. So we did attach an event listener to this parent element, which is the element that all the buttons are wrapped inside of. And we only attached one event listener, okay? And now if I click on any one of these buttons, you'll see that it actually triggers that event listener. And as a result of that event listener running or being triggered, it's actually invoking the handle click function that we just wrote. And this principle is known as event bubbling. Event bubbling is basically an idea where you attach an event listener to a parent element and any of its children elements, if you will, or any of its children's children elements, any events that take place that are, in this case, a click event, they will actually invoke the event handler that we've registered for that event. So that's basically what's happening here. Now, in addition to event bubbling, there's another principle known as event delegation, which is going to allow for us to change the behavior or change our response to this behavior based on the element that was clicked on. And this is going to be coming very useful for cases like, let's say when I click on this clear button, notice how it does invoke the handle init or clear function, but also it's going to run the handle click function as well. So we're going to use event delegation to take care of this, okay? So we're going to have to write some logic so that we don't try to run both of these at the same time. So let me go ahead and dismiss this. Let's head back over to VS Code, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to that handle click function right here, and let's go ahead and just console log. Let's console log event dot target, okay, and let's just save that right there, and that way we can at least see which element is being clicked on. So I'll just show you a quick demonstration of how we can actually see the elements here. We're going to do, let's press Command Option J to open up our JavaScript console. All right, again, that command was Command Option and J. Okay, Command Option J, and that will open up your JavaScript console. Now, when you click on an element, okay, you'll see that I get the button for the division. If I click on the 5, there's a button for a 5. I click on the C. Notice how it runs this function first, and then it runs the other function, and we're seeing that pop out right here. Now, what's going to be really helpful in this case is that every button except for the except for the clear button has a class of button. So we can use event delegation by first checking to see if the element that was clicked on has within its class list the button class, okay? So let's head back over to VS Code, and what I would like for us to do is let's console log event.target.classList. Okay, event.target.classList. And we'll save that. Okay. Now if I click on, let's click on this 9 again, you'll notice that it says that I have the button class. Okay, you see that right there? Here's another one. Yep, we can see that there as well. Looking really good. Let's click on the clear button. And notice how there's nothing in there. It doesn't have the button class, okay? Now there's a really useful function that we can use. Let's go back to VS Code. It's called contains. And well, this is a method that all you got to do is pass in an expression. In this case, just a single string representing the class that we're looking for. And this will actually return a Boolean true or false, depending on whether or not this is a button. So I'm going to click on the 5. Yep, we get back a true. This is looking really good. Let's click on that clear button. And that is false. So we definitely don't want that happening. But yeah, this is going to be very helpful, especially when it comes to setting up our event delegation. So what we can do now is, instead of this console log, let's actually take, you remember that variable that we set over here called input? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to actually do two things, okay? Whenever this application first loads, this function is going to run right away, okay? This function is going to run right away. Now, we want to set the output to an empty string, okay? We're going to set it to an empty string as soon as the function loads. However, whenever someone clicks on this button, what I'm going to do is I'm going to reassign it to the result of, now watch what I'm going to do here. I'm going to assign it to this expression. Now I know this is a Boolean, but I'm actually going to use this to our advantage to create a ternary expression. So we're going to say, okay, is this expression truthy? Okay, let's add our ternary operator right here. If it is, okay, if that class list does contain the button class, we're going to assign input to event.target.data, or actually, hold on, let me think about this for a second. You know what? I was already kind of like thinking about what I wanted to do without really even having done it yet. So it would be probably helpful to think about what could we assign input to if we have the event target itself, which is the element, but we need some content from that element that's going to represent the actual button itself. Now we do have text content, but unfortunately, in some cases, the text content is actually like a symbol, like for example, the division symbol that I use. So one thing that we could use is a data attribute. and I'm actually going to break this across lines for just a moment. We're going to come back to this. We're going to come back to this for a second. Let me just say that right there. We have to fix something in our HTML before we can actually continue on, because I realize that we got a little bit ahead of ourselves, and that's okay. This happens. This is part of software development. So let's head over to our index.html. And in case you're having trouble following along with what I'm thinking about, let me just share what I have in mind. Every time an element gets clicked on, we're going to be able to actually see which element invoked that event. Now, I want to get some data from each element that's going to represent which button was clicked on. And one of my favorite ways to do this is by adding a data attribute to our element. So that's what I'm going to do. Let me just show you what I mean by that. If you add a data attribute allows you to assign basically a single value to a DOM element. And we can actually grab this value from our JavaScript if we wanted to. So the data attribute for this 7 is going to be the value of 7. Okay? And I can actually do the same thing for this next one right here. Let's add the data attribute. By the way, anything that comes after this hyphen, this is up to you to decide. So you could even call this, I don't know, you can call this button value or something like that. That's a little bit wordy. You could call it really anything. You could even call it val. But I'm going to call it value because I'm a little verbose. So we're going to go ahead and add the value of 8. And then let's go ahead and add the rest of these. Now I'm going to go into multi-cursor mode. So let me click on the inside of this div. I'm going to hold down Option again. And let's just go ahead and just click these. We're going to go into this multi-cursor mode so that we can add all these at the same time. Okay. And in case you've missed that, let me do it one more time. All I got to do is hold down the Option key on my MacBook keyboard, and then I just click wherever I want the next cursor to go. Okay. So let's go ahead and add these in. And then in one swoop, we can do data hyphen value. Okay. And then I'm going to hit the escape key to get out of multi-cursor mode. And all we're going to do is just basically copy down these values. Now, for the division, I'm going to use the actual JavaScript division operator, which is just the /, and then let's do 4, 5, and 6. And then for the multiplication, I'm going to use the JavaScript multiplication operator, which is the star. And then we'll do 1, 2, 3, and then we'll use the minus operator. And then let's come down to 0. We'll use a period. Let's add the plus, and then the equals. Okay. Now, again, if you're still having trouble following along with what I'm doing or why I'm doing this, I kind of sort of started to allude to this as I was programming, and I didn't even realize what I was doing because I was getting into the zone there. So let me just show you why I added these data attributes. And if you ever want to, you can actually Google search data attribute MDN, which is a resource that I definitely recommend doing. But Google search data attribute HTML MDN, and you'll see a whole article that talks about what these are used for. But I'm going to show you right now. Oh, that went ahead and refreshed. Let's head back over to VS Code, and I'm going to head over to script.js. Now check this out. I'm just going to console log event.target.dataset, and we'll just stop right there. Event.target.dataset. Let's save that. Now watch what happens. If I click on one of these, notice how I get this, what looks like an object. And that's because it is. It's an object with key value pairs, and this key is actually the name of my data attribute. Notice how it says value. It's because the name of the data attribute is data-value. So if I would have named this something other than value, you would have actually seen that there instead. So every time I click on one of these, we can actually get, see, even for like the math operators, we also get those to show up as well. So let me show you how we're going to use this, okay? Let's head back over to VS Code, and let me just get this out of the way. I'm going to uncomment those lines that I was starting to work on. So we're going to use a ternary expression to first evaluate whether or not the target that was clicked on contains the class of button. If it does, we're going to assign input to event.target.dataset.value. Okay. Now, if this is not if this does not have the button class, let me just go down to the next line. We're going to give it the value of null. Okay, and this is going to allow us to basically get out of here and just, basically not do anything else if what was clicked on is not actually a button. So all I got to do is put an if statement and just say if we don't have an input, I'm going to use the not operator. Let's see, there we go. If we don't have the input, just return. Okay, just get out of there. Okay. In case this is kind of weird looking and maybe you haven't seen this before, all I'm doing is taking a falsy value, which is null, right? In the case where, let's say, what was clicked on is not actually a button, I'm flipping it to true, okay? And then I'm just going to return immediately. So this just prevents any code below from running. All right, now this right here, this expression, it's a conditional expression. It's kind of more of implicit than explicit. If I wanted to make this more explicit, I could say if input is strictly equal to null. I could do that. That's really the same thing that we're trying to do here. But this is way more explicit. Okay, so all I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to basically just use the not operator because it's a little bit more succinct. And it definitely matches kind of more along with my own personal coding style. So let's go ahead and save that right there. And yep, there's that function firing off. Now let's go ahead and click on this. Okay, and everything seems to be working just fine. Now we're not console logging anything, so that's why you're not seeing anything log in my console. But watch what happens when I click on the clear button. Notice how only, well, you haven't seen it yet, but only this clear or init function is going to run, right? Notice how it's not running both functions anymore. This is called event delegation, okay? So I'm able to basically prevent anything else from happening in this container when I click on the clear button, right? I don't want to do anything else but just start over from scratch, okay? So there's that. Yeah, so let's go ahead and head back over here, and I'm just going to remove this alert because we really don't need this anymore. And I think for the next part, this is a really good segue where we could probably start committing some code because I think we have a pretty decent boilerplate started. Let's do git status just to see what is going on here. Oh, yes, and we also did, let's see, what did we modify in our index.html? You know what? Let me just see what we changed there. I'm going to click on index.html. And oh yeah, we added the data, of course, we added the data attribute. So I want to go ahead and commit that change. By the way, in case you want to see what I did here, I just clicked on the Git widget, and then I clicked on index.html. And that is showing that there has been some changes. So anytime you see the green, that means there's some additions. And we also kind of removed, we shifted over some things. So that's why it's also showing that we have deletions as well. But yeah, we have insertions and deletions in this case. So yeah, we're definitely going to want to commit that. We technically don't have enough JavaScript to really, I guess we could. We could commit what we have. At least we have a good starting point. So yeah, let's go ahead and get this out of the way. Let's open up our integrated terminal. And I'm going to do git add index.html git commit adds data attributes. All right, and then we'll do git add js script.js git commit adds Ipo boilerplate. And that's pretty much just talking about adding our state variables, adding our cached element references, our event listeners, and then the first couple of functions that we're going to want to invoke, such as our event handlers in this case. So let's go ahead and do that. And let's go back to our JavaScript, okay? We still got a little bit more work to do. So now that we're doing event delegation, I don't need to put this alert here anymore. The next thing we want to do is, well, we want to basically grab this, or take whatever the output is, okay? We want to render it to the browser, okay? The other thing we also want to do is whenever a button's clicked on, we also want to render that to the browser as well. And whenever I say the word render, basically what I'm talking about is the process that we're going to follow to transfer the state of our application to the DOM. Okay, so we'll baby step this, and I'll show you what I mean and what exactly I'm talking about. So let's go back to this first function that gets run as soon as the application loads. I'm going to put a render function, or a call to render right here. And render, this function will transfer the state of our app to the DOM. Okay, now I haven't defined this yet, so let's head over here and let's go ahead and define that function. And what is render going to do? Oh, and I have a typo here. What is render going to do? Well, we just explained it. But just to break this down into simpler terms, it's first going to, well, it's going to need to check to see what needs to be added to the DOM. Now, render is really just going to be controlling what is shown on the display in this case. So just as a reminder, that's going to be basically whatever is going to be showing here. Okay. So, oh, don't worry about this. So basically what we want to do is we want to take that element that we've selected and we want to change its value, okay, based on whatever the output is, okay? So what we can do here is I can put an if statement. I can say if output, okay, if output, all right, so if we actually do have a value, okay, I want to take the input EL and I want to change its value to whatever the output is. Okay, and I'm just using an if statement right here. This is going to be, in this case, something other than an empty string. Starting out, it's going to be an empty string. Now, when we start clicking on stuff, we're going to eventually want to set the output to whatever the user clicks on. And when they do start clicking on stuff, we're going to be calling render again, and that value is going to be assigned to the value of our input element. However, if there is nothing here, then I'm going to put an else statement right here, and I'll just say input el.value is equal to a 0. Okay? Now let's just see what that does, okay? Now remember, I'm calling render as soon as the game, or not the game, as soon as the application loads. So you're going to be able to see this showing up right away. Let's go ahead and save our file, and let's head back over. And it does show that I now have an input right here. Okay, or I now have something showing up in my display. Okay, I now have something showing up in our display. What we want to do at this point is we want to start adding the things that we type in our keypad to this display. And this is actually really easy to do, believe it or not. We're going to head back over to the JavaScript, and right inside of this handle click function, after we have verified that we do have a button being clicked on, all we're going to do is we're going to set the output value. We're going to assign it to whatever it currently is, plus whatever input is. Okay? Now remember, input is going to be whatever the user clicks on, and as long as that is something other than the clear button, okay, we are going to basically, well, in this case, assign it to whatever the current value of output is, plus input. So let's go ahead and save that right there, and let's just see what that does. Now, one last thing that we should probably do is render changes. render changes to the DOM. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call render right here. Okay, we're calling render in what? 1, 2 places. Look at that. 2 places. We're reusing the same function. So this render is going to get called because now output has changed. And this is where we're basically checking to see if output is anything other than an empty string. Okay, now render is going to be running this logic instead of this one. Okay, or this line of code. Let's go ahead and save that right there. Let's go back to the browser. And now if I click on something, hey, check that out. So I can do 7 plus 7. Now this doesn't really do anything right now. We're definitely going to need to fix this. I can now click the clear button, and that goes back. It's looking pretty good. All right, cool. So now the other thing I also want to address is this equal sign. We really don't want the equal sign to show up in the display, and I'll tell you why. This is not useful. Yeah, it's not useful to the user. They don't need to see this in there. This equal sign is basically where we are going to evaluate a mathematical expression. So rather than showing this in the display, we actually want this button to do something special. We want it to invoke some type of calculation function, okay? And this is going to probably be the simplest way to calculate a mathematical expression. You're going to be blown away by this. Some of you probably didn't even think it was this easy, but let's go ahead and head over to the VS Code to see how we can do this. So again, with event delegation, I can actually put another if statement right here, and I can say if input is strictly equal to this equal sign, what I want to do is I want to return the invocation to a special function that we're going to create called calculate. Okay, and the reason why I'm returning it, okay, is because I don't really want anything else to run. Okay, don't run anything else, just calculate. Notice how these return statements are kind of like, they're like stops, right? We're going to stop the rest of this functionality from running because we just want to calculate at this point, all right? Let's go ahead and define that function. I'm going to put that right here. So we're going to do function, calculate, and what is calculate going to do? Well, it's going to do something pretty cool, all right? Let's just go through the various steps that we want to do. We're going to create a custom calculation function that runs a math expression. Okay? Then we're going to reassign the output state variable to the result of our calculation function. Okay, then what do we want to do? Well, in case you guessed it, we want to render changes to the DOM, right? Transfer the state of our app to the DOM. Guys, visualization is always second. Visualization is always second. You always want to figure it out in your program first. And then once you have all the logic down, the visualization of that data is the last step, right? You want to basically run all this stuff in here. Once you've made the calculation, we render it to the DOM, okay? It's very common to think of using the DOM itself as some type of memory store and trying to store values in our elements in the DOM. It's not a really good idea to do that. I mean, I guess you could argue that our data attributes are kind of storing data in the DOM, but that's kind of more static data. It's not dynamic data that is changing based on the state of our app. So yeah, this is definitely something that you want to put into practice. And I'm not going to call this customer function. Let's call that custom. There we go. So how are we going to do this? Well, There's a couple different ways you could. Now, I'm going to go to Google Chrome and I'm going to show you something. If you do mdn, let's see, let's do eval JavaScript. There's actually a function that exists in the browser called eval. And eval is, well, for lack of better words, it's actually it's a terrible choice. But first, you probably want to know what exactly is it? Well, it will actually evaluate JavaScript code represented as a string. And this is the secret sauce right here. This is what makes this so special. What you can do is you can pass to it a string, okay, that has characters in it. And if those characters, in this case, let's say it's something that looks like a math expression, it'll literally coerce that data, turning it into the various things that it needs to be, in this case, 2 number values and an operator, and it'll actually evaluate it and produce some type of output. Now, they give you this warning right here that it's a bad choice, and I agree, because not only is it a security risk, you could actually have a hacker inject some code into your eval function and make it do some other things that are probably not going to be very ideal. It's also very inefficient. There is a alternative to this that we're going to be using, which is a function constructor. And I mean, it kind of does the same thing. And we'll scroll down here. Let me see if I can find an example of this. I'm going to go down here. Yeah, so there's a couple examples. Okay, here we go. This is something kind of close to what I want to use. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to basically create a function using the function constructor. And what's really cool about this is this will produce a function object, and whatever we put inside of this string, this is going to become the body of the function, and we represent it as a string. And notice how, well, it does use a useStrict token right here. I'm not going to put this in strict mode, but what I am going to do is put a return statement, and the expression that we need to evaluate is going to be basically our output. Okay, we're going to evaluate our output, and that's going to basically go right here. And then what we'll do is, yeah, once this gets resolved, then we're going to assign that result value to, well, it's going to basically get reassigned to the same variable output, and then we will render that to the DOM. So let's head back over to our JavaScript program, and let's get started by writing all this out. So I'm going to create a variable right here called calculation. And oh, okay, looks like I already have some spelling completion right there. Let's assign this to a new instance of the function class. Okay, and then right here, I'm going to add a string expression using backticks so that we can take advantage of interpolation, and I'm going to add a return statement. And inside of parentheses, we're going to use that interpolation syntax and basically just put the output in here. Now this output variable is going to basically contain a mathematical expression. And when this function eventually instantiates, well, whenever we create an instance of it, we're going to be able to invoke it, and it's going to basically just run this code. And it's just so cool how it works. Let's go ahead and add our semicolon there, and then our semicolon here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here, and we're going to reassign our output variable to be the result of invoking this new calculation function that we instantiated from the function class. Now, another thing I also want to do, just to kind of keep this as clean as possible, is I'm going to wrap this in a string constructor, because even though JavaScript will coerce the data for me, this is actually, the result of invoking this will give us back a number. But I want to coerce that into a string, and this is totally unnecessary and probably overkill. But I'm just doing it because I just feel like it would be a best practice in this case, but JavaScript will naturally coerce the data for us. But again, I want to turn this back into a string because ultimately that's what is going to be sent back to output. So I want to keep this data as clean as possible. At this point, we can go ahead and remove our comma or our comments. Okay. And yeah, the next thing we want to do is render the changes to the DOM. And all we got to do, guys, is just call render. Look at that. Look at that. We're calling it in 3 different places. And this code is so much more maintainable because we have given this one function the job of just transferring the state of output to the DOM. That's all it does. Okay? So now, I think we're in good shape. Let me clean up these comments right here. I'm pretty certain that we could test this out and probably get a pretty good result. Okay? And yeah, I feel pretty good about this. Okay. Let me clean this up. Let's save that. Let's head back over to our browser, and I'm going to close this out right here. And then we'll just do 7. Let's see. How about 7 plus 7? And let's go ahead and press the equal sign. Whoa, look at that. What about, let's just keep it going, right? 14 minus 2. Whoa, look at that. Times 2. Nice. Let's go ahead and clear. Okay, that seems to be working. What about 8 divided by 2? Love it. What about, we'll do 4.5 plus 4.5. Perfect. Well, guys, there you have it. We created a calculator app. Now, one last thing I definitely recommend doing. We don't want to be able to access our values in here, and I'll tell you what I mean. That render function is in here. All right, notice how I can access render, I can access handle, click, I can access handle init or clear, or handle clear or init. I can actually access my program's variables and references to my functions, and that's not really a good practice to have this exposed. So as a final thing I recommend doing is actually wrapping your entire program in an immediately invoked function expression, okay? Immediately invoked function expression, IIFE, also known as an IFE. And what this is going to do is it's going to give us the benefit of local scope, and it's going to basically shield all of our variables and their values from the global scope, and that way they cannot be accessed within the JavaScript console, okay? So the way you write this is you start by adding a set of parentheses, you put an anonymous function in here, okay, oops, anonymous function, and then you add your parentheses followed by your function block, and then you're going to go outside these parentheses and add an invocation to that function. Let's go ahead and add our semicolon right there, and I'm going to basically wrap our entire program in this, okay? So let's go ahead and pretty much cut this function block in half. I'm just going to highlight this. Let's do Command X to copy that to my clipboard. And then we're going to basically scroll down, or we're going to put our cursor down to this next line. I'm going to highlight all of this code starting from line 3 all the way down. And then I'm going to tab over one tab. Okay, this is going to preserve our indentation. Let's go ahead and paste in the last bit of that IFE right there. Okay, and this is just going to shield our script from being accessed within the global scope, and pretty much everything is going to be protected within local scope. This function will run as soon as the browser executes it. Okay, so let's head back over to our Chrome browser here. Let's see if we can access handle init or clear. Yeah, that's not working, and that's because it's not there anymore. Well, it is there, but we cannot access it in the global scope. And there you have it, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. That was so much fun. This is a very, very, very simple implementation of a JavaScript calculator. I hope you'll enjoy this, enjoy building this as much as I have. Let's go ahead and commit our last, we'll do a git add to our last file, which was JS script.js, and we'll do finishes program. Now, keep in mind, there's also some arguments about one last thing I got to talk about. There are some arguments about this being a security risk as well. Yeah, for something that's going to be a little bit more complex, this is definitely going to also have some of the same vulnerabilities as that eval function that exists in the browser. But in terms of efficiency, this is way more efficient. And I feel like we have a lot more control whenever we create an instance of the function class. For something that's probably a little bit more complex, and if you wanted to add more functionality, I would suggest using an object-oriented approach to basically build out the various pieces of functionality of your calculator. So it's going to also make it a lot more scalable, especially when it comes time to maybe adding some scientific calculator functions as well. This is probably about as high up the chain as we can scale this. I don't think we could scale this any further without completely refactoring this function, and maybe even some of the handle-click logic as well. So yeah, an object-oriented approach would probably be a much better way to build a calculator, but I just wanted to show you at least something that will get you started and be a nice little project to have under your belt as well. So again, hopefully you enjoyed this, and if there's any questions that you have, feel free to leave a comment, and I will see you in the next video.